Hello, everybody. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Phenomenology of Time by Edmund Husserl. This is a series of lectures that he gave between 1905 and 1906, and then he later had a bunch of addendums that he added to them. These are about phenomenology, which for our purposes is the close description of the structure of experience from the perspective of the one who has the experience. There's a couple things we want to break into here. The first part is that this is a description. It's not a theory of what is behind experience. It's not about the world outside of experience. It's not about what causes experience. It's about describing experience and its structures as exactly as you possibly can. And it's all from the perspective of the person who has the experience. We're going to be looking at temporality, which was a big issue for Husserl and Heidegger. It was foundational to some of their debates and and Heidegger's splitting away from Husserl later in Husserl's career, when Heidegger was starting to become famous. But for now, we're going to be looking at Husserl's interaction with Brentano. Brentano was one of Husserl's mentors. He had a very exact philosophy of mind, and Husserl begins his treatise on time by looking at Brentano's failed philosophy of time. According to Husserl, it was unpublished, and he's working off of notes he had from lectures that Brentano gave. Husserl also recommends that everyone read St. Augustine's treatment of time in Book 11 of the Confessions. I agree. You should read Augustine. Yeah. One thing that Husserl wants to put out of play at the very beginning of his treatise is the idea of objective time. Husserl is interested in time as it appears to an individual, and the idea of time and the origin of the idea of time in an individual and their experience of it. He is not interested in time as it is in the world. He's not interested in objective time or physical time or whatever kind of time you can imagine which is not related directly to your immediate experience of temporality. And what he's interested in are things like duration, like our experience of duration and the present moment. This is what he's looking at. Connected with this, he has 4 a priori laws related to time. The temporal order is an infinite two-dimensional series. That's just to say that you can model time the same way you can model a line. There's the beginning of the line, which is the past, there's the present moment, which is the middle, and there's the end of the line, or later in the line, which is the future, and he'll just say that the line is infinite. The next one is that 2 times can never be conjoint, which follows with the relation between times is a non-simultaneous one. No 2 different times can ever exist, together. They are always at different points. And then for every time, there is an earlier and a later. These are all important aspects of time for Husserl. Okay, Brentanos Theory concerning the origin of time. Look at that beard. Doesn't he have a magnificent beard? Yeah, anyway. First, the past. Past instances and their relationship to the present. So Brentano's theory starts with our immediate rememberings of the past. He says that when you remember the past, or when you're experiencing something, your immediately previous experience is still with you in some way. Think of a song. The first chord of a song affects how you perceive the second chord in a song. And in some way, you're still experiencing that first chord. Otherwise, you would perceive these as completely different objects. They wouldn't appear to be part of the same song. They would simply appear as completely individual instances of sound, which they don't. So the past, in some way, affects your experience of the present. Next, they are not with us in the same way the present is with us. Otherwise, we would just hear every part of the song at the same time. If past moments were with us at the present, you would just hear the first chord and the second chord as if they were both playing at the same time. So there must be a different way that past moments are presented to us than present moments. And Brentano says that this is presented to us in the mode of fantasy or imagination. And he says they could either be just past or further faded away. Now, really quick, we want to look at the difference between experience and fantasy. For Brentano, experience is something which has like an immediate cause in the senses, like your brain is just learning something new, and this is the experience. Fantasy isn't caused by the senses. Fantasy is about something which isn't immediately present. It's something which you gain by remembering things or imagining them. It doesn't have an immediate cause in your sight or your touch or your hearing, though those may be like distal causes, like maybe you remember something that happened last week. But when you remember something that happened last week, you aren't remembering something which is currently happening now. And that's what's important here for the distinction between experience and fantasy. Though it is important to note that from the perspective of the person who has the fantasy or the experience, the difference is only in content. It's not. It's not a difference in any other way. So the fantasy and the experience appear to a person in similar ways. Okay, then the type of theory, this is a content theory. This means that the difference between the present experience and the past fantasy is a matter of content, which changes as it goes further into the past. This is very important. So, drilling home the point from the last slide, the difference between the past moment and the present moment is one of content. From your perspective, the only way to distinguish them is by the different content that the fantasy and the experience have, not by any other feature. You distinguish the past moment and the present moment by their contents and not by something else. Then the future and infinity. So that was where Brentano derives his idea of duration. However, he also is worried about the future and infinity. For knowledge of the future, he says that you have something similar to the fantasy of the past. You create a fantasy of the future. Before you pick up a cup, you occasionally image to yourself, or you have this idea of what will happen when you reach out, grab the cup, and pick it up. And you do this by recombining elements of past experiences. An example of this would be maybe you see a red house and you see a blue ball. You can take apart the different aspects of these experiences and produce the idea of a red ball. Simple as. And this is how you have this like immediate imagination or fantasy of the future, is by recombining past experiences so you know what will happen when you pick up the cup and take a drink. And then infinite time is a construct for Brentano that you just reproduce this over and over and over again. You just keep thinking in the future moment, well, will I have a future moment? Well, in that future moment, will I have a future moment? And you do the same thing going into the past. Now we have some criticisms of Brentano. The first one is that Brentano's phenomenology of time is actually not strictly phenomenology. And the reason for this is that there are aspects of this which aren't about the first-person experience of time. These are the distinction between fantasy and experience, imagination and experience. That's about some sort of physical cause of your experience, and Husserl is totally uninterested in this. These don't tell us about the difference between our memory of something and the immediate happening from the first-person perspective. They give us some sort of objectivistic view of like how the brain causes experience, but we're not interested in that. What we're interested in is the origin of the idea of time from within our experience. So we're just completely bracketing that. That's not of interest to us. Now, what isn't of interest to us is, does the past differ from the present only in its content? So there's the content of the past experience and the content of the present. There's the first chord and the second chord of the song. Now, if the first chord appears in the same way to us that the present moment appears, then we don't have our idea of duration. Remember, from the first person experience, the fantasy and the experience are the same. What distinguished between them was whether they had an immediate cause in the senses. But we're not interested in what has an immediate cause in the senses, because we're interested in our first person experience of these. And the first person doesn't distinguish between fantasy and experience on this theory. There's only supposed to be a difference in content. But there's, that would just mean that from our perspective, the fantasy and the experience are the same. The content is still there. So your memory of the song, or your memory of the first chord, is something which you experience in the same way that you experience the second chord. So you lose the idea of duration here. Duration goes out the window simply because at every moment you're having a completely new set of experiences, and they're all just different contents. It's just different contents in each new moment, but you never retain contents from a present moment to a past moment. This is a little obscure. I'll explain it a little bit more on the next slide. But what's important is that this would make duration invisible, because all we ever have are present moments. We have present moments that include experience and fantasy, and we have no way to distinguish between the fantasy and the experience, because there's no difference between the past moment and the present moment from the first person perspective. Now, Husserl has a solution for this. He'll say that at the first moment of the song, when you hear the first chord, that's in the present moment. So that's under the present mode, and it has the content of chord number 1. Then when you go to the second part of the song and you hear chord number 2, you still have all of the content of chord number 1, but you have it under a different mode. So the past retention is what he calls it. Your retention of the first chord has all of the content that your present experience of the first chord had. However, your retention is a different mode of experience. So the content is the same, but the mode of presentation to the individual is different. And this solves the problems with Brentano's theory, because for Brentano it was only a difference in content, so the past and the present were indistinguishable. But for Husserl, the past is presented to us under the mode of retention, or being just past. And now we have this experience of duration and continuity. You have the same content going from a present mode to a past mode, from present experience to retention. It doesn't have to be indistinguishable from the first person perspective. And now we have the true origin of the idea of duration and continuity. It's through the multiple modes that the same content passes through. It passes from the present mode to the past mode of presentation. Yeah. I hope this has been clear. I don't know how easy it is to follow this stuff. I hope I haven't butchered anything too poorly. It's really complicated. But yeah, I hope you guys learned something. I think I'm going to continue doing these videos about phenomenology for a little while. I've got some Husserl, I've got some Heidegger I'm probably going to get to at some point. It's really fascinating. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you learned something. I hope you have an excellent day.